World War I. The Great War. The war to end all wars. A war that was propagandized as a quick, heroic skirmish, yet lasted more than 4 years and claimed the lives of 9 million soldiers all over Europe. A new kind of war that was too advanced for military leaders at the time, who still relied on antiquated tactics against modern weaponry. One of the greatest tragedies our civilization faced and a horrendous waste of human life. And as a setting perfect for an interactive medium like video games to explore feelings of dread, isolation and hopelessness. So, perfect for frictional style of horror stories. The Bunker is the latest entry in the Amnesia franchise, a series of games loosely tied together by the overarching Lovecraftian lore of the otherworld, with its grotesque and horrifying inhabitants, most prominently, the Shadow.
The Shadow?
The Shadow?
The Shadow.
A guardian entity hunting those who came into contact with the otherworld's relics, or maybe caught a glimpse of the otherworld's secrets, or maybe just any outsider who discovered the otherworld. Its role in the new game is more of an easily missable cameo near the end of the game, so it stands to reason that its inclusion wasn't as well thought through as one would hope. After the release of the game's demo, one user review on Steam complained about the game's superficial inclusion into the broader Amnesia mythos, since it seemingly had nothing to tie the game to The Dark Descent, or Rebirth for that matter. At least not on the surface. The game could, after a few tweaks, be, for all intents and purposes, part of the Penumbra series. And I mean, it is true that this time around the protagonist's case of amnesia doesn't really add that much to either the playing experience or the story. It is mentioned at the start of the game that our player character Henri, due to a recent head injury, doesn't remember some of the events leading up to his injury and has a hard time recalling his own name. A journal entry we find later provides a bit more context for the rather fragmented intro to the game, but we didn't really need the amnesia excuse for that, and the story neither relies on nor benefits from it. It's only the player who gets a bit more insight into the character they control, which would have paid off the same way without this hollow nod towards the other games in the series. Daniel's amnesia was an important cornerstone of the Dark Descent story. It gave context as to why we were in Brandenburg Castle, and it told us not only our character's goal and motivation, in that he had to kill the Baron for all the atrocities he committed and had forced us to do.
Let's see what you have to offer. What a mess. I should have sharpened the saw.
Please, let me go. I won't tell anyone, I swear. I just want to go home. Please, please.
And it does a lot to characterize Daniel. He wouldn't have been able to go through with killing the Baron if not for him using the amnesia potion on himself, and by that absolving himself from all the gruesome things he has done. At least for long enough until he achieved his goal. It made sense in a way for Daniel to come up and follow through with that plan, and additionally it stirred up intrigue as to who Daniel actually was and what he actually did. How severe were his sins? We as players learned about it throughout the game, and we either despised Daniel for his actions or empathized with his attempts to redeem himself. Henri offers nothing of that. We see the events leading up to the start of the actual plot, albeit a bit fragmented, and we learn about what's missing from Henri's memories from 1 or 2 nodes in the game. And there's not even that much to talk about. While Henri is revealed to have acted a bit dickish one time,
and using an old sleight of hand trick, there's no way I'll lose.
He's not even close to the moral fiasco that is Daniel or Oswald. And the story neither gains anything, nor does it make any use of the memory loss with its reveals, when the last pieces of the story fall into place at the end of the game. That said, the game does make heavy use of the broader Amnesia lore, with its inclusion of the other world, gruesome rituals in pursuit of immortality and the transformation of humans into bloodthirsty abominations. Frictional is kinda between a rock and a hard place with this one. Amnesia as a brand is way too strong to just drop the name for something different, but with a name like Amnesia, players, especially newcomers, expect there to be some memory loss as a core concept. That said, Henri's amnesia could have played a more prominent role, but I guess they wanted to focus on the more involved gameplay this time and the pretty big cast of characters, even though you mostly learn about them through notes and diary entries. Maybe Frictional should think about rebranding before their next entry into the series. The first game could have just as well been called The Dark Descent, Amnesia, with Machine for Pigs being the second Dark Descent game and Rebirth the third. Calling this game The Dark Descent, The Bunker doesn't sound so bad, does it? Just a suggestion. But enough preamble. Let's start with our dive into the depths of darkness, into the horror that is The Bunker. We start off, actually not in the bunker itself, but in the trenches surrounding it, during an attack by the German forces.
Da ist der! Oh no!
So, I guess the French army's lookout didn't do their job? My impression was that soldiers mostly remained in the trench, because stepping out of it and crossing to no man's land was as good as a death sentence. But there's Fritz right on top of the trench, hailing bullets down on us. Well, to be fair, it actually was the Germans who had somewhat of a success with their infiltration tactics. That also explains why there's only a small number of crowd soldiers and our defenses looking kinda abandoned. They just surprised us at a more vulnerable point. It's a bit unclear where we are exactly in relation to the rest of this game's locations, but it is implied that the French soldiers who got injured during this attack were relocated to the titular bunker to gather a force there and wait for the right moment to strike back at the Germans. But more on that later. So this part of the game serves as an introduction to the established mechanics of Amnesia as well as some new ones, in a rather linear and highly scripted tutorial sequence, before the game releases us into the more open-ended horror playground of the confined space of the bunker. You learn how to pick up items, check your inventory and grab items from it or combine them to craft new ones. Infer your health from a kinda diegetic yet vague interface, how to interact with objects in the environment and manipulate them, how to walk and run and crouch and crawl under obstacles. Standard for Amnesia games, but it's good to teach new players some of the more quirky mechanics in a safe environment. Well, as safe as a trench under attack can be. You also learn how to ready a weapon, check its ammunition and how to reload it, bullet by bullet, one at a time. And already this early on the game emphasizes on everything you're doing taking up quite a long time. You have to ready pretty much every item to use it and all of the animations are rather extensive, so you want to be deliberate when committing to taking any action. Before this section ends, the game teaches us two more mechanics. We have to break a wooden door with a heavy brick, which becomes rather important later on. And we get gassed by the Germans and only survive because one of our comrades hands us a gas mask, which is not as important later on, but still a useful mechanic. The guy who saved our life is Augustin Lambert, Henri's best friend who has to undertake the next patrol out into no man's land because he lost in a game of dice against Henri and gets severely injured after falling into a weird crater. Henri, out of concern for his friend, follows him into no man's land and tries to take him back to safety, but gets ambushed by the Germans and caught in an explosion. And here the game truly starts. After some time has passed, Henri awakens in the infirmary of the bunker he's stationed in. Everything is quiet and dark. Henri doesn't remember how he got back and is fuzzy on what led up to the events. I guess the fragmented intro sequence tries to imply his hazy memories. But something isn't quite right. Where is everybody? Has the attack happened while Henri was out cold? Has the war ended? Is everyone already dead? Of course not. One guy is still alive. But in true horror game fashion, not for too long. In the infirmary we find a little hand-powered flashlight, and the unnamed, soon-to-be-dead soldier hands us a revolver, but we have to find ammunition for it ourselves. And the game handles this funny in a way. I understand what the game is going for, but it's still a bit weird. So the game never wants to shower us in resources. Every bullet should feel precious to us. That's why we only ever find single bullets. But they are still represented by these huge boxes. But it's still a better use of space and resources than Amazon parcels. The same goes for inventory expansions. So you find these large bags or pouches, and the game even informs you that you can now hold on to more items. Items. Plural. But all you get is this stinky little item slot. It's totally fine gameplay-wise, it just could have been presented more clearly. So now that we have a gun and the monster has revealed itself, we are now ready to get the fuck out of this bunker. And right when we're thinking that, the last of the lights go out and we are truly shrouded in darkness. Our little flashlight doesn't help that much in keeping the darkness at bay. And also doesn't run for too long until we need to crank it up again, which is fairly loud and can attract the monster to our position. The mechanic behind this is more or less that whenever the monster is not actively searching for us, then we can use the flashlight without concern. But when we attracted the monster through some actual loud noises, it is now more likely to crawl out of its tunnels and roam the immediate area. Using the flashlight during that time will cause the monster to beeline to our position, even if we're in a hiding spot. And yes, those are back again.
There you are. Hello, monster. Oh. 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 Oh no. Oh no, it's looking. Oh, holy fuck! Okay.
It sometimes isn't as clear as to what counts as a hiding spot and what doesn't. I once tried to hide in a confessional booth that didn't look too different from the wardrobes that functioned perfectly well as hiding spots, but the monster just opened the door with no second thought and killed me instantly. And I didn't even create any loud noises. And this was a somewhat scripted encounter, so I couldn't even do anything to avoid the monster. So most of the time the monster reacts to sound and appears when you are creating too much of it. Whether by walking and running instead of sneaking, by pushing heavy objects around or throwing objects, or by using weapons. But sometimes the monster is triggered by your progress in a certain objective, when you pick up certain items, keys or notes. The monster still behaves the same as in any other encounter, but sometimes you're already in a bad spot and try to be careful and sneaky and silent, and then the monster is just upon you. This wouldn't be so bad if the game gave you the means in that moment to avoid the monster, but as I said before, sometimes the systems and mechanics just don't work how you'd expect them to do. You see the monster approaching, you hide inside the one thing resembling the rest of the hiding spots, and the monster just goes straight for you. Now if something came out of such an encounter, it wouldn't be that bad, but when you just get sent back to your last save point, it just feels as though you got punished for no fault of your own. Another factor that influences the dynamic behavior of the monster is light. The monster prefers to hunt in the dark, and it does its best to avoid lit areas. In gameplay terms, this mostly comes down to a sort of sound multiplier. Certain ongoing noise sources might not be a problem in brightly lit rooms for a rather long duration, but those same sounds might attract the monster a lot quicker in dark rooms. Best example is running. As long as the lights are on, the monster doesn't really care for your footsteps, but it immediately closes in on your general location when you're running in dark areas. So with such a big emphasis on light and darkness and noise, the game better has some good sound design and lighting system. And it really delivers. Sounds are crisp and clear, and there's always some loose rubble, some electric humming, some creaking from doors, lanterns or other movable parts. Your footsteps echo through the bunker, dropping an object cuts through the darkness in horrifying manner. And the raspy grunts and the guttural howls of the monster can haunt you beyond the game. These aren't the most disturbing monster sounds Frictional ever created, but still, they did a fantastic job once again. As for the visuals, shadows are long and dark and seem to devour the long hallways in the bunker. The game can get incredibly dark, and the different light sources fight off the darkness not only to different amounts, but also with differing visual flavors. Your flashlight lets you see a good distance in front of you, but with a cold light, while a torch might not offer much increase in visibility, but emits a warm and pleasant light. And while shadows are dynamic, many of the light sources in the environment are static, so don't expect as much flickering and swaying lights as in Dead Space with shadows playing tricks on you. But the game compensates for that with some really deliberate visual design and placement of the light sources. The developers gave it their all to create a haunting atmosphere, and I think they succeeded in every regard. So, you being in complete darkness right now, after the monster having revealed itself just a few moments ago, is really not that great, and made worse by the fact that the only way forward at that particular point in the game is to shoot open a lock, thereby alerting the monster. On your first playthrough, this can cause quite the panic. Maybe you even forget about the flashlight or press the button instead of holding it, and by that, putting the thing away, which leaves you with even less vision. All while a warning dressed as a tooltip appears on screen, telling you to start running, the monster's roar ringing in your ears. It's all smoke and mirrors at that point, but you don't know that, so you just run. Down the stairs behind another steel door lies your safe room. Or the thing that comes closest to a safe room at least. There's a lamp inside that illuminates the whole room and seems to contain an infinite amount of lamp oil. This not only gives you some mental relief because it's cozy and sufficiently bright, which surely prevents the monster from getting to us in here. Or not. But at least it helps keeping it in its tunnels. You can also save your game in here, though you immediately overwrite your last save, so this is more a checkpoint, and on normal, the only one you get for a long time. Whenever you want to save your progress, you have to make your way back to this safe room and light the lamp. On easy, you get a save point in each of the bunker's major areas, which doesn't really make the game easier, but decreases the risk of each venture. You can still die quite fast to a stupid mistake or a bit of bad luck, and you can still waste your resources on wrong solutions, but now this doesn't send you back an hour or so, most likely to the moment just before you entered a new area. It's like a mid-level checkpoint, so if you successfully found and made your way to your current target destination, you don't have to do so again if you die after this. I think this is only really useful in one area of the bunker, and I will talk about it in more detail later. For now, let's see what else we can find in our little safe room. There's a storage chest, for example. This game plants both feet staunchly in the survival horror genre, with its more slow pacing and an emphasis on atmosphere rather than action, a focus on puzzle solving, resource management, and a limited inventory. Strangely, ammunition has its own dedicated slots and doesn't eat up any of your precious item slots. You still never have enough room in your inventory to carry every item, or even just one of every item type, far from it. Your flashlight occupies one of your slots and so does your gun, and you don't really want to explore the bunker without those items. There are also certain key items required for progression that each need their own slot as well, and then there are non-essential key items that are just good to have, like a lighter to use torches and Molotov cocktails, or a gas mask to be able to safely breathe in poisonous areas, which also each require a whole item slot. So you really have to plan ahead if you want to also bring some bandages, grenades, signal torches or animal bait with you, and keep some room for items you find along the way. Your storage chest gives you an additional
16
item slots, and you can store or retrieve your items at all times when you're right here in this room. There is no other item chest in the game. There's no easy access to your stored items. There's not even a real reason to use the chest. From what I've seen, the game remembers where you dropped an item, and it stays there as long as it doesn't get disturbed by, for example, you blowing it up or shoving it carelessly to the side and not being able to find it anymore. So your items are as safe outside the chest as they are inside it. Just try not to throw a grenade at your grenade pile, I guess. Oh, alright then. The only real use the storage chest has, and it's a superficial one, is that you can store your tools that are undroppable on easy difficulty. I guess this is to prevent you from losing key items in a place you can't easily access anymore, or just forget where you dropped them. But for the most part, the item chest is just a trick the game tries to play to lead you on. To have you think with your gamer brain and maybe overlook the obvious solution or more reasonable approach. My first impulse, if I can't carry any more stuff, is running back and forth between my current location and my safe room, delivering all the items I find to my storage chest. This is not only a waste of time and resources, it also isn't a very beneficial thing to do. Grenades and healing items have greater utility if they are easily accessible within the current area. Just drop your items on the ground in a convenient location so that you can use them whenever you need them. The only items that should be kept near your safe room are the gas canisters. Because next to your safe room is the generator room that supplies the whole of the bunker with electricity, and by that with sweet, sweet light. And it is empty. Completely, utterly, undeniably empty. And at this point you can only fill it up to about half capacity, which provides you with a bit less than 10 minutes of electricity. On normal, that is. On hard, you burn through your fuel a lot faster, while on easy the generator seems to run forever. Next to the generator is a pocket watch that you can synchronize with the generator to track how much gasoline you have left. And while this is useful, at times...
Let's take a look at my watch. Oh man!
Especially when you've been out exploring for quite a while without returning to your safe room and need to check if it's safe to push on or go back and restock, a whole inventory slot is a rather hefty price to pay for a situational bit of information. So far, this game has been rather linear. There was a bit of exploration to find some optional nodes to flesh out the lore and give some diegetic gameplay tips, and there was already one instance of this game's more open puzzle design, though most first-time players might not realize that at that moment, in where you can either shoot open the lock on a door to progress, or look for a heavy brick to break the lock. But you were still restricted to this small ward with only a handful of rooms and only 2 or so non-essential items to pick up. The game will eventually open up greatly, but before that there's still one last roadblock. The door that leads into the rest of the bunker is locked with a combination lock, and you need the correct code to open it. No ways around it. Fortunately, there is a note right next to the door informing you that some of the soldiers tend to scribble their locker codes onto their dog tags. And hey, there's a dog tag right there, so let's take a look at it, and it's a dart, of course. The dog tag we need is next to the generator, or well, next to another dead soldier, presumably the one who operated the generator and worked in the office upstairs. But yeah, this red herring is here to teach us that not every one of those dog tags will be of use to us, and later there will be many instances where we need to spend resources to collect the tags, so it becomes a bit of weighing up the cost-benefit ratio. Most of the rewards from finding the locker codes on the dog tags are pretty useful, so you want to go after them, but you never know before which tag contains a code and which one doesn't, which can sometimes lead to you wasting resources you're already short on. And that can either raise the tension or frustration. Not saying that this is a bad thing. I actually think that this turned out just as Frictional wanted it to. and don't bother trying to look up where the codes are hidden. When I wanted to record a few specific things for this video, I looked up the tag locations and got told that the combination for the locker containing the lighter spawns in only 2 locations that are fairly easy to reach. Which was a lie, of course. A bunch of walkthrough, video game FAQ and hint sites gave me the same wrong information. Ross Scott from the YouTube channel Accursed Farms mentioned in his Ross's Game Dungeon series in the past how all the walkthrough sites just copy from one another, and so false information gets spread around and no one really checks it. Though it got slightly better in recent years with comment sections on many sites where errors in the original article get not only mentioned but also corrected a lot of times. Funny enough, I recently watched a video by Carl Jobst on a woman wrongfully claimed to be the fastest typist without any evidence, who even made it into the Guinness Book of World Records. It's a good and informative video on how sources cannibalize each other until it's nearly impossible to even find the original claim. It's a good reminder to stay skeptical and not just believe something just because it has been written down somewhere. We think we're so much more critical in our thinking, but in truth we can be and often are as ignorant as the people before us, before the internet, before telecommunication and so on. We just get lulled in by a different, more modernized lie. You have a source for that? Of course, here it is. Right, no further research required.
When news sources all copy each other like this and don't fact check anything, all it takes is one wrong piece of information and then half of the world accepts it as established fact.
That's just food for thoughts though. As for the game, I personally like the risk-reward aspect of this collectible, but there's still one issue I have with it. You see, to keep the player on their toes and to further the game's replay value, pretty much everything is randomized. Well, not the main objectives, or the placement of key items, or the layout of the bunker. But the placement of traps and resources, and of course the dog tags, is completely randomized. So on a bad run, the really helpful lock codes are hidden the furthest away behind the most traps and obstacles. The lighter is pretty useful when you need to deal with rats, but the code for it is hidden in the area that already plants the most rats in your way. On my latest playthrough, the code for the locker containing the lighter spawned in a room that doesn't have any real utility to the player, is out of your way and has more rats in it. When I finally got my hands on the lighter, the worst already lay behind me and I hadn't that much use for it anymore. So with a bit of bad luck, this randomization can ruin your day, and while the game isn't incredibly long, sessions also aren't quick and dirty affairs like for example in a roguelike. So discovering that you got some really unfortunate RNG in the middle of your run can sting quite a bit. Most of the time there is another way or strategy available, but depending on your situation, loadout or progress in the story, these can be more or less easy to achieve or even to attempt. But it does succeed in keeping the pressure up, keeping you on your toes, keeping you guessing and unsure of what might happen next. It certainly is a fun system with just a hint of potential frustration that could be solved with a little bit of tweaking. God damn it, we're still inside the office. Let's hack in the combination, open the door and cross over to the rest of the bunker. And with that step taken, our true and more or less only objective reveals itself. Sure, the game leads us to a number of different locations and has us complete a few tasks, but all of this is just in service of our main objective. Blow open the collapsed bunker entrance. Our superiors have, as we find out, destroyed the bunker entrance to trap the monster inside, with the rest of the surviving soldiers, which pretty much only means us right now. And we don't really care for spending the rest of our life in darkness, hunted by a gruesome monster, no matter how short of a time that might actually be. So we have to find some dynamite in the ammunition storage and a plunger that was last seen in some ancient Roman ruins below the bunker that have been excavated by accident. But of course, this is not just a matter of visiting these two locations and getting the two items. There are roadblocks at every corner and we have to explore all of the bunker and solve its many puzzle-ish tasks to reach our goal. And our first order of business is to revert the emergency shutdown that sealed off all the areas branching off from this part of the bunker. How lucky that the infirmary hadn't been affected by the emergency lockdown, or we would have been trapped with no way out. But that aside, with this obstacle the game continues to slowly ease us into its design, into the way it utilizes exploration. This next section makes use of all the core mechanics and presents us all the challenges and obstacles we can expect from any of the other areas. Well, mostly. A rather minimalistic map in our save room tells us where we need to go, and this gets updated whenever we receive a new important piece of information. But when we get to the areas we are supposed to visit, our way forward is blocked by heavy metal shutters. Not a problem though, there is a hand wheel nearby to open all the shutters, so we just give it a few good turns and great. Of course it wouldn't be that easy, and you should get used to stuff like this. Our goals are mostly pretty straightforward, but there's always something along the way, something to hold our progress, something sending us on a wild goose chase. And I really like this form of designing objectives and creating the pace of the game. The game could have just given us a long checklist of objectives to achieve, but instead it only gives us a few very simple and very clear goals, but then constantly throws a spanner in the works. When it comes to overall progression from A to B to C, both approaches achieve the same, but one feels like following orders, while the other feels like overcoming a challenge through exploration, observation, and deduction. This harkens back to games from the elusive, immersive sim genre, where you were mostly thrown into an unfamiliar location with multiple ways to approach your objective, with lots of little secrets everywhere or tools to help you overcome a challenge or resources. Games like Deus Ex, Thief or System Shock come to mind, with the last one sharing the most similarities when it comes to open-ended progression. In that game, you also only work towards one single goal, but you need to collect the right access codes and tools to reach your destination. So you have to travel all over the space station, find and unlock the entrances to the different decks, and slowly inch your way forward to the central control room. Kinda like how you need to visit certain sections of the bunker to acquire the means to enter other ones and collect the items necessary to blow open the exit. So now that the hand wheel is broken, we have to find a spare. And I mean finding it. There is no objective marker, no helpful hint in our log to tell us where it is. If we are observant, we can see it inside one of our comrades' lockers in the mission storage. Or we can find a note informing us where to find it inside the locked room of our commanding officer. Don't know why the room itself is locked, because the officer quarters all only have a single entrance and all the doors can only be locked from the inside, so this door shouldn't be locked, at least not in the way it is in the game. It's not a huge issue, but seeing how much thought went into many of the areas and puzzles and how there seems to be a reason for anything out of place, a mysteriously locked door just stands out. And sadly, we will come across a few of those. Most of them, with, I believe, one exception, are completely optional, but it wouldn't have been hard to just use a padlock on these doors. The door would still be locked and we would still need to use up resources or attract a monster to get inside. Well, that's not completely true, because with the padlock there is one additional way to open the door that doesn't require either of the two costs mentioned. I will get back to that in due time, but for now let's just mark this down as an arbitrary inconsistency for the sake of challenge. With the knowledge where to find a spare wheel, we still need to find a way to access it. There's no way to bypass a combination lock other with the correct code, so we need to scour this area to find it. From the safe room exit there are two corridors to follow. One leads to the officer's quarters and a war room, and the other to a storage room. Both doors to the storage room are locked, so this is where my first attempt during the demo unceremoniously ended. That was before I fully understood how to deal with doors in this game. and I was too blind to see the loose grate in front of the ventilation shaft, leading right into the storage room. So these are two possible ways to enter the mission storage. As for the code, this is one of the few dog tags that always spawns in the same location, always in the room of one J. Delisle, of whom is not much known, but he keeps the spare wheels in his locker, and his dog tag is found on a corpse inside his private quarters. His door is also locked, but it makes more sense in this case, since it seems the poor unfortunate soul we find in here locked the door in an attempt to hide from the monster. Exploring and slowly accessing the officers' quarters is a miniature version of what you do the rest of the game. You have a multitude of rooms laid out in a both logical and practical way. This seems to have been a priority for Frictional. The level design in The Dark Descent was a lot more gamey in that regard, with arbitrarily long and endlessly winding hallways and rooms often connected and laid out in really impractical ways. Not so in this game. The level layout is first and foremost functional. It mimics actual structures and facilities meant for people to work and live in for days or weeks at a time. To create enjoyable levels out of this, the developers employed clever tricks like rubble or collapsed walls to block or enable progression. And of course, lots and lots of locked doors. You can find lots of nodes as well as resources, more than you can carry in fact, so you get a first taste of managing your inventory, weighing up whether or not it's necessary or beneficial to deliver items back to your safe room, or rather remember where you left them, or even take them to a more advantageous or accessible spot. You will encounter traps, at the very least one of them that is always placed at the door of Blanchet's room. This early in the game you can't do much about traps. You can try to avoid them or spring them, and that's it. Trapdoors will always be triggered by opening the door, but tripwires can be jumped over. You'll later get an item to disarm traps and even collect the grenades used in them, but at that point you got past most of them already. You'll also come across different kinds of locks. Door latches that can only be used from the inside of a room, which means you must either find an alternative or secret entrance to a room to unlock the door, or destroy it outright, which will always attract the monster. Then there's padlocks that can be shot or destroyed with bricks or explosives, but with the last two options, most of the doors will also be destroyed, since most of them are made out of wood, and there aren't that many steel doors locked with a padlock. You'll also find iron chains that are indestructible to most of your items and weapons, and can only be destroyed with a pair of bolt cutters. You won't find too many of those, and they mostly guard optional resources or nodes. All except for one single instance. The bolt cutters have an extra use though, that may or may not be that obvious on your first playthrough. You can use them on tripwires to disarm any trap, and you can even use them to silently open padlocks. To be honest, it didn't even occur to me that this might be a valid use of that item. I mean, sure, it would work in the actual real world, but video games are always way more restrictive in how you're allowed to interact with, well, anything. So I found out about this during a repeat playthrough just to collect footage of various mechanics and systems and the like, where I didn't take things too seriously, and I just happened to come across a padlock on a filing cabinet with the bolt cutters in my inventory. So I just tried it for the fun of it, not really expecting it to work, but it did. It was a bit of a eureka moment for me. And I mean, the game does remind you on more than one occasion that there are always multiple solutions to any challenge, and that you should experiment, because if you can think of something, more likely than not, it will work. But is that actually true? Short answer, not really. There are a lot of instances where you need to perform one specific action to progress. To leave the safe room, you need to find the door combination, and you can only find that one on a dead soldier in the generator room. And no, I don't count a 1 in 10,000 chance of guessing the correct combination as a valid option. Even though it technically is, and honestly, I do commend the game for allowing this. To access the rest of the bunker, you need to lift the lockdown using the turn wheel found in Delisle's locker, for which you need another code. To get the dynamite from the ammunition storage, you need yet another door combination. This game relies a lot on combination locks to hinder your progress. And you only get the code in the communications room, that you can only access with the communications room key. To enter the Roman tunnels, you need to cut through a metal chain with the bolt cutters, and to get the bolt cutters, you need to loosen the screws on a metal grate with the wrench. The last two are especially egregious, I mean in the context of the game telling you there's always multiple solutions, and that they both each have only one mandatory use, but are still both required, and each of them are found in a separate area of the bunker that doesn't contain any other mandatory items. So you have to go to maintenance to find the code for the locker containing the wrench, and you have to visit the prison and use the wrench to grab the bolt cutters, just to open a single door with them to reach the Roman tunnels and find the plunger. Now, the bolt cutters are rather useful in how they let you deal with traps and a lot of the locks you'll encounter, and the wrench lets you open 2 or 3 more grates, so I guess you get a bit more out of it. And that's why I don't think that the use of these two items is bad or anything, just that the way they're integrated into the main progression is the most arbitrary within the game and the least immersive due to their obvious gaminess. There's only one of each in the whole bunker, even though there are tools lying around all over the place and there even is a workshop within the bunker. But the only wrench is inside a soldier's locker, and the only pair of bolt cutters is lying on a stool next to a German war prisoner. I guess the implication is they were about to be used as a torture device, but I believe there are more practical tools to torture a prisoner than the only pair of bolt cutters in the whole bunker. Gaminess aside, I would have preferred if those two obstacles on your main path that require the use of the wrench and the bolt cutters had another, maybe hidden or more difficult or dangerous solution. The door leading to the Roman tunnels is near the ammunition depot, so maybe give me an option to blow open the wall or something. But that way release poisonous gas that was stored in the depot and contaminate the whole bunker permanently. That way you'd even get a good use out of your gas mask that I didn't use once during my first successful playthrough of the game, or the unfinished attempt before that I stopped after about, I believe, 70% through the game. The game toots its own horn on how many different solutions there are to any problem, while in actuality your approaches are a lot more limited than it appears at first glance, and how the game makes it out to be. Generally it functions like this. Most items have multiple uses and most objects have multiple interactions. Wooden doors can be opened normally or destroyed by grenades, by heavy bricks, or shot open. Padlocks can be shot open or destroyed by heavy bricks, where have I heard that before, but can also be disposed of with the bolt cutter. And sometimes locked rooms can be accessed through other hidden entrances and then quietly unlocked. And for the most part, that's it when it comes to exploring and progressing through the bunker. There are more wooden objects that can be destroyed, same as the doors, or you find ways around them. This is most apparent in the armory, which is essentially just one single large room, but cluttered so much with shelves and crates that it becomes like a labyrinth. And there you can either destroy the shelves and create lots of noise, or push boxes and crates around to jump over them and create a little bit of noise, or blow up gunpowder barrels and create convenient paths through all this, but also release poisonous gas that you can only safely traverse with a gas mask. The game does offer quite a few options when it comes to progression, maybe not on a level of the original Deus Ex, more of the more recent-ish sequels, though in a more unique way, that certainly expands on mechanics established in its predecessors. But it doesn't offer the limitless freedom the game implies with its opening message. It actually is rather restrictive with how you're allowed to interact with your surroundings. Yeah, every object has a small number of different possible interactions with certain other objects, and those lead to different solutions, but don't expect a complicated simulation of physics interacting with each other and interconnected systems, like for example in Breath of the Wild, where any given challenge could be significantly altered by the underlying and sometimes randomly occurring systems that, when they interrelate, even open up completely new paths forward. And to not be mistaken, I don't expect the same depth in this game. This isn't an open world game, and both overall progression as well as isolated challenges are a lot more intimate. But when you tell me that everything I can dream up is a possible solution, then I'm a little bit disappointed when the game doesn't allow for certain approaches. It's that much more exhilarating though when a wacky idea actually works. Like this one time with a group of rats in my way where I really tried to avoid creating noises and keep the destruction of the area to a minimum, and where I spotted a barrel on a shelf, so I just pushed it towards the rats and killed them mostly silently without causing any havoc. Now, this wasn't really that clever of me, it was the game's recommended solution. But it made me feel clever in that moment, and it rewarded observation and patience. There are many small moments like this in the game, and those really stand out, but when it comes to the big moments, your main objectives, the game is rather restrictive. It's more like a checklist of possible solutions instead of an open-ended sandbox. Like, you use gas canisters to fill up your generator, but you can also use unfinished Molotov cocktails. The gasoline can also be spilled on the ground and ignited with a flare, a torch, or a Molotov cocktail. The developers thought really hard about what players would try to do in the game and tried to implement as much as they could, but not in the form of interacting systems, but as simple binary interactions. And you soon begin to see the strings. There's a heavy brick hidden in every major area. There's a little map room with a locked door in every major area. The entrances leading to your main objective are always indestructible and only to be opened with a specific tool. While you can pick up and throw many objects you find in the game world, only a few dedicated ones inflict damage, like the heavy brick, barrels, or their more dangerous exploding cousins. So when you try to get past a group of rats that are always stationary on dedicated corpses and don't have any helpful items in your inventory, you can't just shoot them away by throwing hammers or saws at them. You can't even gas them. You need to use the tools the game specifically flagged as able to inflict damage upon impact or activation. Now, I say all this with the intention of making things clear, of giving some perspective to the kind of misleading opening message of the game, not to make the game itself out as bad. You can still come up with multiple solutions for many of the challenges. You are still rewarded for your creativity and patience. The game does a lot to make you feel smart, and exploring the bunker and slowly opening up paths with all the different tools you find is a rewarding experience. And depending on what resources you find and how efficiently you manage them and how well you take your surroundings into account, your approaches and playing experience will vastly differ. And the element that mostly affects your options and your possible approaches is the non-linear progression. The game starts off slow, with a very linear and very cinematic intro sequence, then a small area with not much to find in it and only 2 small rooms off the beaten path leading to the game's hub area, which already offers a lot of hidden goodies and inaccessible rooms, but no progress-halting obstacles. You can traverse the whole of the bunker's entrance area from one end to the other without any problems. Most of the later areas will have roadblocks in your way that force you to go down a different path first, or return to your save room and equip the required items, or even visit a different area first. After releasing the emergency lockdown, you finally get access to the whole rest of the bunker, which includes the soldiers' quarters, the prison, the maintenance area, the ammunition depot, and the tunnels leading to the Roman ruins. All these areas can only be accessed from the hub. There are no paths connecting 2 areas directly, not even the Roman tunnels next to the ammo depot. You technically don't have to walk all the way back to the bunker entrance to travel between those two areas, but they're still two self-contained and from another isolated levels with only one entrance. Each area can be harder or easier depending on when during your playthrough you're trying to tackle it. And in each area you find and spend resources which can either help or hurt your efforts in later areas, and there are some really helpful tools or upgrades to be found in some of the areas. Having the gas mask before you enter the armory makes things a lot easier, and collecting the wrench and bolt cutters early can really help you out. But then you'd want to have the inventory upgrades to be able to collect more resources, now that 2 of your item slots are blocked by those helpful tools. Having flares or animal bait helps incredibly in the maintenance area. A good reserve of ammunition can save you in the tight quarters of the prison, where the monster is scripted to appear on multiple occasions. And having enough gasoline is not only helpful but required for the soldiers' quarters, where many traps are close to invisible in the dark, and you need to activate all the breakers to listen to an important broadcast in the communications office. On that note, there are multiple instances where it is required to have the generator up and running. You could possibly explore every area in total darkness, just with a lot of added challenge due to the decreased vision and the more aggressive monster. But there are a few contraptions you need to activate and which need electricity to work. To receive the door code from the ammo depot, you need to supply the radio in the communications room with electricity. To open the cell that contains the bolt cutters in the prison area, you need electricity to operate the door mechanism. And to access the Roman tunnels, you first need to drain some water using a pump that also requires electricity. So, bad time management can softlock your game. There should be more than enough gasoline in the game to accomplish all your goals, and it is always possible to visit another area and search for more gasoline, but you could technically run out, and then you're unable to access mandatory areas, and by that, locked yourself out of beating the game. And this feeling always looms over you. And because you can ruin your whole playthrough with just a bit of bad resource and time management, and you can only have a single active save state, I actually appreciate the fact that you can only save the game in one location, even with the frustration that sometimes arises from it. On easy, you find another save point at the end of every major area, and you're tempted to use it. So if you'd been playing badly, you've locked yourself into an already bad run. By only being able to save in the hub area, you more likely than not only save before and after clearing a whole section of the bunker. So if things go wrong and you've wasted resources or are badly hurt or just took too long, you can decide to load your checkpoint from before you ventured into a new area. Of course, even on easy you can always decide not to use the extra save points, but the temptation is always at the back of your mind. So you slowly creep around the bunker, conserve your precious gasoline, manage all your resources, and while you step by step gain access to all your main objectives, the biggest obstacles in your way aren't traps or non-functional machinery or inaccessible areas. The biggest threat is rats. Holy shit, I hate these little fuckers. They gather around dedicated corpses and attack when you get close. And while there's not too many rat packs in the game, with most of them contained to one single area seemingly designed around their appearance, quite a few times they're thrown right in your way. You can try to blow them up or incinerate them along with the corpse to rid yourself of them permanently. You can try to shoot each individual one of them, which not only wastes ammunition but also way too much time. Or you can use a torch or animal bait to lure or shoo them away for a few moments. Though both these options aren't really within easy reach. Earlier I went on a rather long tangent about how laborious it can be to get the lighter, and that the area in where you most profit from it is also the one you need to clear to get it. At least if RNGesus doesn't love you. And animal bait is also not something you get showered in. Not that I think anyone would want to. And each piece of bait takes up a whole slot in your inventory, whereas torches are reusable to an extent, and also only take up one slot, in addition to the lighter. If you can't dispose of the rats, you really should steer clear of them. When you step near them, they politely warn you not to come any closer, but if you disregard their warning, they will attack. And even a small, gentle nibble is all it takes to throw them all into a frenzy and have them devour you within seconds. And in this game, damage to your health harms you in two ways. First, in the obvious way, in that you trigger a game over when your health drops to 0. But in addition, even minor damage causes a bleeding wound, which immediately attracts enemies. The stalker more easily tracks you, and rats straight up run up to you and attack. And yeah, it doesn't matter how you took damage. Gas poisoning causes as much bleeding as a love tap with razor-sharp claws. The stalker is a more prevalent but far less annoying enemy. After lifting the emergency shutdown and opening all the major areas of the bunker, scratch that. Somehow I managed to trigger the monster while the emergency shutdown was still in place, when the monster isn't supposed to run around in the open. The stalker begins to roam the hallways, crawl through the walls, and generally be on the lookout for prey. It's of course not dynamically roaming the bunker, not like Mr. X in the Resident Evil 2 remake or Lady Dimitrescu in Resident Evil 8. Or Jack from Resident Evil 7. There's a lot of Resident Evil going on in here, and it's not on purpose. The stalker behaves more in line with Dead Space's necromorphs, in that he has a whole lot of diegetic spawn points all over the bunker, from which he can appear whenever you attract his attention. So there are those monster holes everywhere, with more of them popping up over time. Not even your safe room is, well, safe from them. And the stalker uses them to either meekly attack out of them, or crawl out of them and charge towards you. But the stalker is courteous enough to make his presence known, by blowing some dust out of his hidey hole. So you know that he's lying in wait for you. If you still approach the wall hole, he will attack you with a claw swing. Now, his random swings only take away a moderate amount of health. But if the stalker is out in the open and deliberately attacks you, it's almost always an instant kill, where he pins you to the ground and breaks your neck or rips your head off or disembowels you. It's actually not very graphic, but it's easy to imagine what this monster does to you. And there's not much you can do against this beast. Well, that's not exactly the case. While it is true that you can't actually kill the monster up until the end of the game, you have a good selection of options when it comes to fend off the monster. You can shoot it in the face a few times to force it to retreat, lure it into a trap or throw Molotov cocktails or grenades at it, but be careful, because the ultra realism of the game can royally screw you over when throwing a grenade too late and waiting for an eternity for it to go off, while the monster just walks up to you without a care in the world and slices you to ribbons. But yeah, it pretty much always comes down to dealing enough damage to the monster to chase it away. So keep a good eye on your ammunition and have a spare grenade on backup. And if you don't have the resources to fight or simply want to avoid fighting, you can try to hide from the monster under tables or inside wardrobes. Just be careful not to have any untreated wounds. And for the love of God, don't charge your flashlight. There's also one other method to keep the monster at bay. On your first playthrough you might only come across it near the end, since the direction the game gently leads you in as you explore the Roman tunnels last. What with you needing to visit 2 insignificant areas before to access them, and you get told where you find the access code for your other objective as soon as you enter the bunker's entrance area. So it makes sense to follow up on that lead and not go on a wild goose chase. Which sadly prevents you from experiencing a neat little tidbit of not really environmental storytelling. How would you call it? Maybe non-explicit storytelling? Yeah, that's alright for now. So in the Roman tunnels you can find a crack in the wall that leads outside into a big crater in no man's land that you for some reason can't just crawl out of, where you can find a little stuffed rabbit. And with this being an item in a video game, you expect it to have a special effect on some of the enemies. Well, there aren't too many different enemies. I don't think the rats care much about it, so there aren't many possibilities left. There's actually a few other enemies in the game beside the Stalker and the Rats, though they have very little screen time. One of them is a sniper that takes shots at you while you are in the pillbox, a turret battery. You never see the sniper and you can't defend against him. It's just a representation of an environmental hazard localized entirely within the pillbox.
Yes.
The other enemy is one of your fellow soldiers who's gone mad with fear and some other things and now roams the Roman tunnels, muttering and whispering to himself when he's not screaming into the void, armed with a shotgun and firing at everything that moves. At first I thought that this might be his little plushie, since I did find dolls and the like earlier in one of the officers' private quarters, but no, I was wrong. You can't reason with the man anymore, and all you get for your efforts is a shot to the face. You can leave him be or kill him to get his rifle, which is one of two methods to get the shotgun. Another one is sitting in a locker in the mission storage. No, at that point I still missed a bit of context. I hadn't found a certain note, one of two that explicitly explain the whole mystery. I was pretty certain of what had happened, where the Stalker came from and why it haunted this particular bunker. But a few pieces of the puzzle were still missing, so I didn't immediately connect the plushie to the Stalker. If you throw it near the monster, it will stop in its tracks. Well, more often than not. And pick it up, cuddle it, and escape with it. And then it's gone. Forever. The plushie, I mean, not the monster. That one is ready to tear you apart immediately afterwards. And the stuffed animal also isn't gone forever. Because this is where the aforementioned piece of storytelling comes in. Because the monster has built a little nest out of rubble and entrails and other body parts deep within the bunker. In the maintenance area to be exactly. In the little chapel within the maintenance area to be precise. Which gives this whole place really Cthulhu-esque demonic cult vibes. And the centerpiece of the beast's lair is an altar, and if the monster escaped with the little rabbit doll, you'll find it here, carefully placed upon the altar. Pretty early on you discover notes speaking of the monster. The soldiers heard scratching from within the walls and deep howls from deep within the bunker. The first mutilated corpses turned up and soon the soldiers came face to face with the monster. And they were mostly able to write about it because one of their own sacrificed himself to save the others. And those who do describe the monster note the human features, the face they barely recognize. So it seems the monster was once human, once a fellow soldier. And the way it reacts to the stuffed animal and how it brings it back to its nest is its last fleeting memory of its humanity. You don't need to find the two notes written by the soldier who eventually becomes the monster to guess who it is. But they give you some hints towards the whole little story tidbit with the stuffed rabbit. Now, when the game starts and the Germans assault the trench, you get saved by your best friend Lambert. So already a red flag for him. The next section has you follow Lambert into no man's land at a later date, where he was selected to go on patrol since he lost a bet against Henri. And we later learn from one of our own notes that Henri cheated and was so guilt-ridden he ventured out into no man's land himself to look for his friend. We find Lambert in a big crater, most likely the one we'll later find the stuffed rabbit in, badly hurt, possibly on the verge of dying after days of lying in here. We fill our flask with the water in the crater and give him something to drink, and then haul him over our shoulder and carry him back to the bunker. Or at least we try, before mortar fire hits us and we slip into unconsciousness. The next time we wake up is when everything has already happened. From another note we learn that it was Lambert who carried us back. Him who was badly hurt, who'd surely been even worse off after we got attacked. But for some reason he made a miraculous recovery and even carried us all the way back. And then the killings occurred. So there's no doubt that Lambert turned into the monster. But how? And here the plot ties into the rest of the Amnesia franchise, with all its otherworldly cosmic horror. Because during the construction and expansion of the bunker, the French army discovered ancient Roman tunnels and subsequently surveyed them. Their goal was to use the tunnels to infiltrate the German trenches from below, so they moved their equipment, dug deeper and had the soldiers spend long stretches of time down in the ancient ruins. During that process, they unearthed various texts about horrifying pagan sacrificial rituals, And soon enough strange occurrences happened. People heard strange voices in the night, had horrible nightmares, vanished in the darkness and reappeared later, changed, and gradually went insane. Something was alive down there in the depths of the ancient ruins. Something that whispers sweet, sweet lies into receptive ears, promises about immortality, about never-ending pleasures. The kind of stuff Alexander von Brandenburg would promise his victims. The Stalker itself shares a lot of similarities with the ghouls from Amnesia Rebirth. The way it behaves, the way it looks. It was created by having a human drink the other world-infused water, giving him the powers from the other world for the cost of his humanity. When you explore the ruins, you see glimpses of creatures, shades moving around, that also look very similar to the creatures in Amnesia Rebirth. There's even a reference to the shadow from The Dark Descent, when you fall off the walkways inside the ruins and plummet into the depths, where the shadow is waiting for you, ready to consume you. The whole story is very much Amnesia, though I do think it clashes a bit with the more grounded survival horror story of a soldier trapped in a bunker, fighting for his life and trying to escape. I stand by my earlier point in that this game didn't need to be an Amnesia game. The main character's amnesia doesn't create much intrigue. The game doesn't even really seem to be built around a mystery. Fairly early on we discover the guilt Henri had burdened himself with, and depending on how you progress through the bunker's nonlinearity, you'll soon find out that Lambert turned into the Stalker and that it has something to do with sinister, supernatural forces from inside the ancient ruins. You can dig deeper and it is very rewarding, but not required. I guess I would have preferred if it were a standalone story. Let the Stalker in the game be more like a manifestation of everyone's fear due to recently being under constant attack from the Germans. Maybe in the end it is revealed that the Stalker didn't even exist, that they collectively made up the story of a supernatural being murdering them all, when in fact it was a series of accidents. Maybe some were blown to bits by mortar fire when the pillbox got attacked. Maybe some committed suicide. Or maybe they did conjure up an angry spirit through their fear combined with the horrors of this war. But alas, this is a game in the Amnesia mythos, so there needs to be connections to the other world, to the shadow and whatnot. It's alright, it works, I just would have preferred otherwise. The story is generally of minor importance in this game. It's not a grand, epic conspiracy. You don't battle godlike beings, you don't stop otherworldly forces from invading our sphere. It's all about the situation you're in right now. Things have already happened and you're not really interested in ancient rituals. You want to survive, you want to get out. The plot just happens. And abruptly ends. So when you finally, after much back and forth, manage to find the explosives and the plunger and forcefully reopen the bunker entrance, you of course won't just wander out of there. Instead, you have to face the monster one last time in another part of the ruins, and this time it won't just back away after a few shots with your handgun. Completely contrary to how the whole rest of the game worked, you now have to run circles around the monster in an open space and move crates around to create a makeshift staircase. You can try to attack the monster, you can use the stuffed rabbit on it, but nothing will hold it off for more than a few moments. It's constantly on your heels, and while it lost the ability to one-shot you during this part, it can still kill you pretty quickly. The arena consists mostly of bridges and walkways, so you could try to lead it away far enough to confuse it and have the most amount of time to push the crates before it caught up to you again. You can try to raise or lower some of the bridges to create an advantage, though the level layout is, like many other elements of the game, randomized, so it might not amount to much. More than anything else, this section requires patience. Don't get greedy. Lead the monster away, remember the fastest route to the exit, push the box a bit, be ready for when the monster catches up, and repeat the whole process. Until you finally get a chance to vault the wall that separates you from freedom. When you finally leave the ruins, you slide down another crater, or maybe it's the same as before, not that it really matters. Now it is implied that you can just crawl out of it and be free. whereas earlier the game acted like such a thing wasn't possible. The monster escapes as well, and after you hear German soldiers approaching, the game cuts to black and the credits roll. I wouldn't call it a bad ending. Qualitative. From a story perspective, it certainly is a bad ending. The monster is now out there and Henri surely gets captured by the Germans and might even get shot on the spot, or die as a war prisoner. With its place in the greater Amnesia timeline, I'm not sure how it leads into the other stories. Maybe nothing else will come out of it. A bleak ending for an Amnesia game is fine. I didn't expect for Henri to survive all of this. But something has to be done about the monster. There are more stories to be told. And people can. From day one there have been modes and tools available for people to tell their own stories and make their own levels for this game. So you have potentially infinite content with this game. Most of it will be shit, but there might just be some really great levels as well. There's also 2 other endings. Well, 1.5. One ending I already mentioned earlier is triggered by you falling off the walkways and coming face to face with the shadow. The other ending is achieved by throwing the monster off a bridge, which is most easily achieved by throwing the rabbit doll on a bridge and when the stalker picks it up, blowing it up with a grenade. After that you just walk out of the bunker. The ending plays out the same, just without the monster escaping as well. And that's Amnesia: The Bunker. Is it a return to form? Well, I'm not sure. I enjoyed the first Amnesia game I played long after the hype had died down. It's a very well designed, very well thought through experience that has more depth than its seemingly sparse mechanics made it look. It had a fresh approach to horror that has been copied to death by now, and it told a very compelling story in a highly competent way. But let's be honest, only the first Amnesia game was actually any good. Rebirth had a ton of missteps and Machine for Pigs wasn't even made by Frictional. I can't really comment much on the Penumbra games because I only played the first one for a bit, but I can wholeheartedly recommend Soma. Amazing science fiction, incredible philosophical horror and existential dread, and stellar art design. So let's say 2 out of 4 games are actually worth a damn, and I'd say as a purely mechanical horror experience, this game deserves to be mentioned along the good Frictional games. The freeform survival horror gameplay kept me on edge throughout. I never felt powerful or safe, but also never completely helpless. The monster was a threat up until the end of the game, but it wasn't just a game of hide and seek. I was allowed to make mistakes and had the tools to make a comeback. This is not necessarily a game you play for the story or lore, even though there's some really compelling character drama in all the different nodes you find. And you can gain quite a lot of insight into the events leading up to all of this. But this game is something you play for the purely mechanical enjoyment, for the gameplay, for mastering its systems and finding creative new ways to utilize all the options you're given. So yeah, I still don't know if it's a return to form for a Frictional game, because it differs so much from all their other games, but it is a really good addition to the survival horror genre. So give it a try, either on Xbox Game Pass for console and PC, for the time being, on Steam or PlayStation. So if you're looking for something to get scared by, maybe for Halloween or any other dark and stormy night, you can't really go wrong with this game.